If you are new to our channel, please do consider subscribing to our channel and giving us a like. But if you are a regular, welcome back. The courtroom hummed with quiet anticipation, a subdued murmur beneath the weight of impending judgment. Ornate chandeliers overhead flickered, casting long, wavering shadows against the dark oak panelling. The air carried the acrid tang of old cigar smoke, mingling with the scent of varnished wood and the faint perfume of anxious bodies pressed close on the spectator benches. At the defendant's table, Bella Moretti sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned a ghostly white. The pearls at her throat, modest but unmistakably expensive, lay still against the high neckline of her dark dress. Every inch of her appearance had been carefully curated for the jury's benefit. A woman neither too vain nor too plain, neither too pitiable nor too aloof. But beneath her composed facade, a tension coiled. The courtroom doors groaned as they opened. A uniformed officer led Sammy Green to the witness stand. He was a wiry man with restless eyes, his copper hair hastily combed but failing to disguise its unruliness. His suit, though decent, bore the unmistakable wrinkles of a man unaccustomed to such scrutiny. The prosecutor, a gaunt man with a sharp nose and an even sharper tongue, stood with measured authority. He gestured toward Sammy. "State your name for the record." "Samuel Green," he said, clearing his throat. "Most folks call me Sammy." "And your profession?" I run numbers. Just small time, nothing big." A whisper rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor allowed a pause, letting the implication settle before continuing. "Tell the court what you saw on the night of September 14th. Sammy shifted in his seat, eyes flicking to Bella for the briefest second before darting away. He adjusted his tie with shaking fingers. "I was coming out of the back of Kavanagh's," he began, naming the speakeasy with a knowing glance at the jury. "It was late, near 2 a.m. I'd had a drink, just one, mind you, when I heard a sound. Like someone gasping." He swallowed. "I looked down the alley and there she was." He jabbed a finger toward Bella. "Standing over Franklin Drake. He was already gone. Blood everywhere." A collective murmur swelled. The judge rapped his gavel once. At the defense table, Bella flinched, but she said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her lawyer, a polished man with an air of calculated charm, leaned in. "Objection," he drawled smoothly. "Mr. Green's testimony is speculative at best. He claims to have seen my client standing over the victim, but he has yet to state if he actually witnessed the act." The judge, an older gentleman with deep-set eyes and a face carved by decades of stern deliberation, tilted his head. "Sustained. Mr. Green, did you see Miss Moretti harm Mr. Drake?" Sammy hesitated. "No, but she was there." The defense attorney exhaled through his nose, barely concealing his satisfaction. "Indeed." In the gallery, Detective Agatha Marple sat quietly, her small frame almost swallowed by the heavy wooden pew. A woman of unassuming presence, she was often overlooked, a mistake she had learned to exploit. She studied Sammy with a critical gaze, his nervous fidgeting, the slight tremor in his voice, the way his fingers twitched when the prosecutor pressed him for details. Not lies, necessarily. But something wasn't right. His eyes flicked toward the exit whenever he paused. A man eager to be elsewhere, that she noted. The trial continued, voices rising and falling in the measured cadence of legal debate. But Agatha remained still, watching. Somewhere in the tangled threads of testimony and half-truths lay the key to Franklin Drake's murder. She intended to find it. The steady tap-tap of rain against the window-pane was the only sound in Agatha Marple's office. The small room smelled of old paper, tobacco, and the faint trace of lavender sachets tucked away in drawers. A single desk lamp cast a warm golden glow over the worn mahogany desk, where stacks of open case files lay like discarded playing cards, their yellowing pages curled at the edges. Agatha sat with one ankle neatly crossed over the other, a cigarette balanced between her fingers, sending a thin spiral of smoke toward the ceiling. She wasn't much for indulgences, but cigarettes helped her think. And tonight she had plenty to consider. She tapped ash into the tray and flipped open a folder marked Samuel Green, a familiar name in the darker corners of the city. He had never been quite important enough to warrant serious attention, but his reputation lingered in whispers. Small-time fraud, petty bribery, a man who had a curious habit of always being near trouble but never quite in its grasp. That, she had learned, was more damning than any conviction. She ran a finger down the column of typewritten offences, noting a particular entry, 1922. Alleged involvement in falsified witness testimony. Charges dropped, her lips pressed into a thin line. That was interesting. Before she could follow the thread, a sharp knock at the door broke the quiet. She sighed, stubbed out her cigarette and straightened. "Come in." The door swung open, and Luca Moretti stepped inside, bringing the scent of damp wool and expensive cologne. He was a broad man, built like a boxer, with a face that had seen its share of fights and a presence that filled the room. His jaw was set tight with frustration, his dark eyes stormy. "My sister's being set up," he said without preamble, his voice a low growl. He took 2 steps forward and dropped a bundle of cash onto the desk. "I need you to prove it." Agatha didn't so much as glance at the money. Instead, she folded her hands and regarded him coolly. "I find the truth, Mr. Moretti," she said, "but I don't take bribes." A muscle twitched in his jaw. He hesitated, then nodded once, reaching forward to reclaim the bills. "Fine," he muttered. "Then find the bastard who did this." Agatha studied him a moment longer. He was angry, yes, but not desperate. He believed his sister innocent, but he wasn't pleading. He was demanding. Fearful law, that meant one of 2 things. Either he had absolute faith in her, or he had a very specific idea of who was responsible. She leaned back in her chair. "Who do you suspect?" Luca exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. "Bela didn't kill Drake. She wouldn't. But someone wanted her to take the fall." He hesitated, then added, "Maybe someone close to him. Maybe someone who had a reason to want him dead." Agatha let the words settle. It was an obvious deflection, but not necessarily a dishonest one. Franklin Drake had been a man of wealth and influence, the kind who attracted enemies like moths to a flame. She reached for her notebook and flipped it open. "Tell me everything you know." Luca scowled but pulled up a chair. Outside, the rain continued to fall, drumming a steady rhythm against the glass as the detective's investigation began. The speakeasy was a world unto itself, smoky, dimly lit, thrumming with quiet conversation and the distant wail of a saxophone. The bartender worked methodically, his sleeves rolled up, moving with the kind of efficiency that only came from years of tending to the secrets of men who drank to forget or to scheme. Agatha Marple sat at the bar, her gloved fingers resting lightly on the rim of a glass of gin, untouched. She never drank while working, not because she disapproved, but because it dulled the senses, and Agatha's senses were sharp. She glanced at the bartender, a wiry man with slick-back hair and an expression that suggested he had seen everything and cared for very little of it. "You knew Franklin Drake," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The bartender, who had not yet volunteered his name, paused in the act of wiping a tumbler. "Maybe I did," he replied, setting the glass down. "Depends on who's asking." Agatha gave him a small, knowing smile. "A woman who pays for information rather than strong-arms it." His lip curled in amusement. "Now that's a rare thing in this place." He leaned in slightly. "Yeah, I knew Drake. Came in often. Good tipper. Had a taste for bourbon and bad decisions. And Isabella Moretti." That got a reaction, a flicker of something in the bartender's eyes before he composed himself. "She used to come in with him, real ladylike. But something changed a few weeks back. She stopped showing up, and when she did, she didn't sit with him." Agatha tapped her fingers against the bar. "Did he take it well?" The bartender snorted. "Men like Drake don't take anything well when they don't get their way. He drank more, got short-tempered." He hesitated, then added, He was seen talking to someone a few nights before he got himself killed. Who? The bartender glanced over his shoulder, as if the very walls could be listening. Vincent Rousseau, he muttered under his breath. Agatha's expression didn't change, though she took note of the way the bartender's voice dropped just at the mention of the name. Vincent Vinnie Rousseau, a man whose reputation preceded him, a crime boss with a penchant for eliminating obstacles, whether they were financial, legal, or human. Drake was in business with Rousseau, she asked. The bartender shrugged. Drake thought he was. Rousseau don't really do business in the way most folks do. He does favours, and when the time comes, he collects. A gust of cold air swept in as the door opened briefly, and Agatha felt rather than saw a presence shift in the far corner of the room. She turned her head slightly, catching the glint of dark eyes watching her. A woman, Maria Gonzalez, seated in the shadows, her posture still, her expression unreadable. Maria had the look of someone accustomed to moving unnoticed, but as soon as their gazes met, she stood, glided toward the door, and disappeared into the night. Agatha exhaled slowly. A woman watching a detective was often more telling than a woman avoiding one. She pushed her glass away and rose. The night had given her much to consider, and somewhere in the tangle of whiskey, jazz, and whispered names, the truth was waiting. The bank records office was a cold, unwelcoming place, lined with towering metal filing cabinets, their locked drawers keeping secrets as securely as a coffin held its dead. A single gas lamp flickered overhead, its weak glow casting wavering shadows on the walls. The scent of dust and old paper clung to the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of ink and brass fittings. Agatha Marple stood by the clerk's desk, her gloved fingers resting lightly on the polished wood. She was patient, offering no more than a polite smile as the wiry young man across from her hesitated, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting a superior to materialize at any moment. "You understand," he whispered, shifting nervously. "This is highly irregular." Agatha nodded, slipping a crisp bill across the desk with practiced ease. "Of course," she said smoothly. "And yet, here we are." The clerk swallowed. His fingers twitched before he reached for the money, tucking it swiftly into his vest pocket. Without another word, he turned and unlocked one of the cabinets, rifling through the records with quiet efficiency. Agatha waited, her expression composed, though her mind moved quickly. Vincent Rousseau's business dealings were, by all accounts, as impenetrable as the man himself, but money had a way of leaving a trail, no matter how carefully one tried to cover their tracks. The clerk finally extracted a thick folder, setting it before her. 10 minutes, he muttered. "That's all I can give you." Agatha inclined her head in gratitude, already flipping through the records with swift, methodical precision. The numbers were complex, deliberately so. Large sums funneled through various shell companies, each designed to obscure the origin of the funds. But then, buried within the labyrinth of transactions, a name stood out. A payment to a shell company, and that company, in turn, had deposited money into an account under the name of Samuel Green. Agatha's lips pressed into a thin line. So, Sammy had been bought. The question was, by whom? She stepped back, exhaling sharply, her breath ghosting in the cold air of the records room. One thing was certain, whatever game was being played, Sammy Green was not just a witness, he was a piece on the board. Vincent Vinnie Rousseau's penthouse was a temple to excess. Gleaming black and gold Art Deco furnishings filled the space, every surface polished to a mirror sheen. Velvet drapes cascaded from the ceiling to the floor, half obscuring the city skyline beyond. A low jazz tune purred from a gramophone in the corner, the slow, sultry notes curling through the air like the smoke from Rousseau's cigar. Agatha Marple stood just inside the doorway, unassuming as ever, her gloved hands folded neatly in front of her. She had been here before. Places like this, at least. Lavish rooms designed to impress but never to comfort. Men like Rousseau built their kingdoms on fear, and their thrones were upholstered in the debts of others. Rousseau himself lounged in a leather armchair, dressed in a silk robe, his cigar pinched between thick fingers. He was a broad-shouldered man, not tall but heavy-set, with slicked-back hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You've got nerve, Miss Marple," he said, exhaling a ribbon of smoke. "Not many people come knocking unless I invite 'em." Agatha offered a thin smile. "I imagine their hesitation stems from a desire to remain breathing." Rousseau chuckled, tipping ash into a crystal tray. "Smart girl." She stepped forward, taking in the details, the half-empty glass of bourbon at his elbow, the faint scent of pomade, the way his fingers drummed idly against the armrest. A man at ease, or a man pretending to be. "You paid off Sammy Green," she said plainly. "Care to explain why?" Rousseau spread his hands in mock innocence. "Nothing to explain. Kid needed some encouragement to say what needed saying, that's all." "To frame Isabella Moretti," Rousseau exhaled sharply. "Listen, lady, Bella killed Drake, everybody knows it. All I did was make sure the law saw it that way." He took another slow drag on his cigar, his smirk widening. "I didn't mean I offed the guy myself." Agatha studied him. His confidence wasn't just an act. He believed what he was saying. That was interesting. "You don't strike me as a man who takes risks," she said. "If you were truly guilty, you wouldn't be so flippant about it." Rousseau leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't like loose ends, and I don't like people playing games in my city. Drake got himself killed, sure, but not by my hand." Agatha let the silence stretch, watching the flickering shadows cast by the gas lamps. Rousseau wasn't lying, at least not about this. He had set Bella up, but only because he had been certain she was already guilty, and that meant the real killer was still out there. She turned toward the door. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Rousseau." His grin widened. "Honesty's overrated, sweetheart. But you're welcome." Agatha left without another word, her mind already working. She had expected to find a killer. Instead, she had found a man who thought he had already done the job, which meant someone else had played them both. The alley was slick with rain, the cobblestones glistening under the flickering light of a street lamp. A stray cat slunk through the shadows, pausing briefly before darting away as the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. The city never slept, but it had its moments of silence. Brief, breathless pauses before disaster struck again. And tonight disaster had come for Vincent Vinnie Rousseau. His body lay sprawled against a brick wall, his silk shirt stained dark, the blood pooling at his feet almost indistinguishable from the rainwater streaming through the gutter. His face was frozen in a final grimace, as though he had realized too late that the world was turning against him. The bullet wound in his chest was nearly identical to the one that had killed Franklin Drake. Precise, calculated, and utterly impersonal. A crime of necessity, not passion. The first officer on the scene had barely time to process the body before he spotted a figure just beyond the mouth of the alley. Sammy Green. Sammy stood hunched, his hands raised as if to ward off the inevitable accusation. His coat was wet, plastered to his thin frame, and his hands, shaking unsteady, were covered in blood. Whether it was Rousseau's or his own, it hardly seemed to matter. "I didn't do it," Sammy's voice cracked with panic. "I swear, I didn't." The officer grabbed him by the arm, twisting him around. "You're covered in the guy's blood, Green. Doesn't look good." Sammy shook his head frantically, his eyes darting left and right as if searching for a way out. I was just passing through. I heard the shot. I ran over. He was already dead, I swear. He swallowed, looking down at his hands. "I just checked if he was still breath in, that's all," the officer scoffed. "What do you call a confession?" Sammy paled. No, The officer yanked him toward the patrol car, ignoring his protests. A second officer bent over the body, letting out a low whistle. "Rousseau, He shook his head. "Didn't see that one coming." A detective, one of the usual city men, arrived on the scene moments later, stepping carefully over the puddles as he surveyed the damage. His gaze flicked between Rousseau's body and Sammy's trembling form. Well, he murmured. "First Drake, now Rousseau, and look who's standing over the body." Sammy's voice was desperate now. "This ain't what it looks like." But no one was listening. The city was predictable that way. Some men were born unlucky, and some men were set up to fall. The rain drummed steadily against the window of Agatha Marple's office, streaming down the glass in silver rivulets, distorting the glow of the gas lamps outside. The small space was cluttered but orderly, papers stacked in neat piles, case notes pinned with methodical precision, an old clock ticking softly on the wall. A single desk lamp cast its golden light over the scene, highlighting the tension in the air. Across from her, Sammy Green sat, hunched in a wooden chair, his fingers knotted together, his damp coat smelling of the night's cold. He had the look of a man who had run out of places to hide, eyes darting, leg bouncing, his breath just a fraction too quick. "You have to believe me, Miss Marple," he pleaded. "I didn't kill Rousseau, and I didn't kill Drake neither." Agatha regarded him coolly, tapping a pencil against her notepad. "But you did lie, Mr. Green." Sammy swallowed hard. He licked his lips, glancing toward the window as if expecting the darkness beyond to swallow him whole. "I didn't have a choice," he muttered. "There's always a choice," Agatha said lightly. He let out a humorless laugh. "Not for men like me," he exhaled shakily, running a hand through his damp hair. "Look, I'll tell you the truth. Someone paid me to lie in court, but it wasn't Rousseau." Agatha stilled. A pause stretched between them, filled only by the steady ticking of the clock. She leaned forward slightly. "Then who?" Sammy hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing. His fingers twitched against the arm of the chair. The crack of a gunshot split the night. Glass exploded inward as a bullet tore through the office window, shards flying like jagged stars. The lamp flickered as Sammy yelped, dropping to the floor, his hands covering his head. The gunshot had missed, but not by much. Agatha, calm despite the ringing in her ears, flicked her gaze toward the broken window. A gust of rain-scented air crept in through the shattered pane, carrying the ghost of gunpowder. She rose, moving carefully to the side of the frame, peering out into the darkness beyond. The street below was slick with rain, but whoever had fired the shot had already vanished into the night. A warning. Agatha turned back to Sammy, who was still cowering. "Well," she said dryly, brushing glass from her desk, "it seems someone very much wants you to stay quiet." Sammy, shaking, pulled himself upright. His face was pale, his breath ragged. I ain't safe," he stammered. "They know I talk to you." Agatha sighed, moving to her cabinet and pulling out a small metal tin. She flipped it open, retrieving a cigarette. She didn't usually smoke this late, but tonight felt like an exception. She struck a match and watched the flame flicker before taking a slow drag. "No, Mr. Green," she said, exhaling softly. "You're not safe at all." And neither was the truth. The courtroom was packed to the rafters. The scent of cigar smoke and damp wool lingered in the air as spectators jostled for position, their whispers a restless murmur beneath the heavy hush of anticipation. Reporters, their pencils poised, leaned forward eagerly, ink-stained fingers ready to record the downfall of a man whose wealth had, until now, shielded him from scrutiny. At the center of it all, standing with composed grace, was Agatha Marple. She adjusted her gloves, then carefully laid a stack of papers before her. The hush deepened. "These," she said, her voice calm but firm, "are financial statements tracing a series of payments made through a shell company. These transactions link directly to Edward Holloway." A ripple of shock coursed through the gallery. Holloway, seated at the defense table, stiffened, his carefully composed expression flickering, just for a moment, before settling into one of cold indignation. "This is preposterous," he snapped, rising to his feet. "An outright fabrication." Agatha merely arched a brow. "Mr. Holloway," she continued, "has spent years cultivating a reputation beyond reproach. A businessman, a benefactor." She tilted her head slightly. "And yet the numbers do not lie. He funneled money to Samuel Green, who, as we now know, was paid to fabricate his testimony. He ensured Isabella Moretti took the blame, all while hiding in plain sight." The judge rapped his gavel, calling for order as voices rose in a clamour. "You have no proof of that," Holloway barked. "Bank statements mean nothing. A woman's voice cut through the din. "I have proof." A rustle swept through the room as all eyes turned toward the rear entrance. The doors swung open, revealing a familiar figure. Maria Gonzalez She stepped forward, composed but fierce, holding a leather-bound ledger in her hands. "I was in hiding," she said, voice steady. "Gathering everything I needed," she turned to the judge. "This book contains records of Holloway's transactions, not just with Green, but with Franklin Drake, with Vincent Rousseau, with men whose names are now nothing more than obituaries." A collective gasp spread through the room. Holloway's composure cracked, his hands clenched at his sides. "This is absurd," he spat. "Lies! But even as he spoke, his gaze flicked toward the door. Agatha saw it before he moved, the instant of hesitation, the calculation behind his eyes. And then he ran. Reporters scrambled, chairs overturned, officers lunged forward. Holloway shoved past stunned onlookers, his polished shoes slipping on the marble floor, as he made a break for the exit. He nearly made it. The bailiffs caught him just as he reached the doors, dragging him back as the courtroom thundered with excitement. Agatha, watching, merely exhaled softly. She had seen it before, a man so convinced of his own invincibility, until the walls closed in. She reached for her gloves, smoothing them over her fingers. Justice, after all, had a way of catching up. The jail cell was a miserable thing, small, damp, and thick with the scent of old iron and despair. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting a weak yellow glow over the rough stone walls and the narrow cot shoved into the corner. Outside, the distant clang of metal doors and the murmur of guards were the only sounds that broke the heavy silence. Sammy, Green sat on the cot, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. He wasn't a religious man, but he supposed everyone found themselves whispering to something in a place like this. He had always known his luck would run dry one day. He just hadn't thought it would be like this. The sound of approaching footsteps made him tense. A moment later, Agatha Marple appeared beyond the bars, flanked by a stern-faced officer. Unlike just calm, steady observation, Sammy let out a breath, shaking his head. "You again?" Agatha tilted her head slightly. "Were you expecting someone else?" He gave a bitter chuckle. "Just myself. I figured I'd sit here long enough to rot before anyone cared what I had to say." She folded her hands in front of her. "That depends entirely on whether what you have to say is worth listening to." Sammy swallowed hard, his fingers tightening. "I lied," he admitted. "About Bella, about what I saw. I knew she wasn't the killer, but I took the money anyway." His voice cracked slightly. "And now people are dead because of it." Agatha's expression remained unreadable, but her gaze did not waver. He exhaled shakily. "If I testify, they'll cut me a deal, right?" Agatha inclined her head slightly. "A reduced sentence, yes, not a full pardon. There are consequences for what you did." Sammy nodded, his throat bobbing. "I get it. I do. I don't want to go down as the coward who let an innocent woman hang." Agatha regarded him for a long moment before speaking. "You did the wrong thing," she said quietly. "But you made it right. Don't waste it." Sammy met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while he felt something other than dread settling in his gut. A chance, small as it was, to leave behind something other than regret. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, the morning sky heavy with grey clouds that had yet to release their full fury. A hush had fallen over the crowd. Reporters with notepads poised, murmuring onlookers, and the last remnants of lawmen ensuring the proceedings remained orderly. But in the centre of it all, Isabella Moretti stood, free at last. She exhaled slowly as if she had been holding her breath for weeks, and then, with a small broken sound, she rushed forward, straight into the waiting arms of her brother, Luca. "È finita," he murmured against her hair. "It's over." The words felt impossible, but she clung to them anyway. Inside the courthouse, Edward Holloway had met his fate. A guilty verdict, his empire of corruption and manipulation laid bare before the world. His connections had crumbled, his influence turned to dust. He had been so certain of his invincibility, so sure that the world would continue to play by his rules, but greed, as always, had a habit of eating men whole. The newspapers would have their story. A once untouchable man, shackled and disgraced. Justice had been served. Not a perfect justice, perhaps, but justice nonetheless. A few steps away, Samuel "Sammy" Green lingered, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He had avoided the gallows, but his sentence was still real. Reduced time, yes, but time all the same. He had made his choices, and now he would live with them. Agatha Marple, watching from a distance, met his gaze. "Don't waste it," she said quietly. Sammy gave a small, tired nod. He wouldn't. With the world moving on, Agatha adjusted her gloves, turning from the courthouse. The rain had begun again, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the pavement in a steady rhythm. She reached for her silver cigarette case, flipped it open, and struck a match. The smoke curled into the damp air as she took a slow drag. Another case closed, another secret unravelled. And somewhere, beyond the rain and the city's ceaseless hum, another mystery waited. Without a word, she stepped into the mist and disappeared, ready for whatever came next.